So this is actually a story that goes way back, that I've been hiding from my parents until I became older, from my teenage years back in the 90s. Me and my friend Sarah were just hanging out one night. We were bored and tried to escape the mundane. Well, that's how this story begins. It's the dead of winter. A blizzard is howling outside, and my friend Sarah and I are sitting around, bored out of our minds. Our brilliant idea was to make some quick cash by offering to shovel driveways in the neighborhood. I mean, why not, right? We needed some excitement in our lives, and some money could get teenagers a whole lot more than what they can around these times. The response from our neighbors was mostly a harsh no. A few would say all right then. Most folks weren't too keen on the idea, probably thinking we were crazy to be out in that storm or didn't want to give up their money. But a couple of brave souls agreed, and we set to work, shoveling snow like our lives depended on it. Every neighborhood has that one eerie house that everyone whispers about. Ours was no exception. The house stood at the end of a quiet street, shadows clinging to it like a bad reputation, and the walls looked like they could collapse at any given time. When we approached, Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances. Should we even bother knocking? But curiosity got the best of us, and we knocked. After a seemingly eternal pause, the door creaked open, and a raspy voice muttered, "Yeah, I could use some help." Turns out the man inside agreed to let us shovel his driveway. We got started, and it took us about an hour to finish up. To say the place was creepy would be an understatement. Sarah got second thoughts about going in there and said we should probably just walk home. But I had no intention of letting our work go to waste. We approached the door and knocked. A couple of seconds went by. We just stood there in silence, listening to our own breath while waiting, wondering if he had tricked us. "Come on in, the door's open," he croaked, his words sending shivers down my spine. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, and we reluctantly stepped inside. The air felt heavy, and I swear my heart was pounding loud enough for him to hear. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The man took ages to rustle up some cash, which he claimed was in the kitchen. While he walked towards the kitchen, we agreed to stand at the entrance and wait for him. But as I said, it took him ages. After a good 4 minutes of complete silence of me and Sarah just looking at each other, we asked him if could find any cash. He told us that he was still looking, but we could just come to the kitchen and wait. We cautiously approached the kitchen, one small step at a time, Sarah holding onto my arm with a tight grip. The atmosphere was tense. As we got close, I caught a glimpse of the man's reflection in a dusty picture frame. Time seemed to freeze as the man's reflection stared back at us from the picture frame, his eyes darker than the shadows that enveloped the room. He wasn't searching for cash. His fingers danced nervously over something concealed in his grasp. The air grew thick with tension, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in my ears. And then, as if the universe conspired against us, his grip faltered, and the object slipped from his hand. The metallic tang of dread filled the room as the knife plummeted, its descent a haunting whisper in the dimness. A sickening symphony of fate played out in slow motion. A symphony only Sarah and I were privy to. The blade hit the floor with a chilling clatter that shattered the fragile silence. The moment felt frozen in time. Panic surged through us, and we turned and bolted out of that house like our lives depended on it. We sprinted through the blizzard, the wind biting at our faces until we reached my front door. Breathless and terrified, we exchanged a look that said it all. Happy to be alive, but scared enough to never tell our parents about this. We knew we should have told our parents about what happened and called the police. But our parents were a bit on the strict side, and as we didn't know better back then, and we didn't want to get into trouble, we kept this to ourselves. Night turned into morning, and we sat there wide-eyed and shaken, wondering what we had just stumbled into. We didn't sleep a wink that night. This happened back when I was much younger. Back then I had a friend who I played football with. Every Thursday after practice, we went back to his grandparents' house and had dinner with them. It had become a ritual for us to play hide and seek every Thursday after dinner, since the area his grandparents lived in had great hiding spots. Our hide and seek wasn't the typical hide and seek. It was something we made up ourselves. One person hid while the other sought, just like the usual game. But we had a unique rule. The seeker could call out 3 times during the game, and the hider had to make a noise if they heard it. It could be anything from a whisper to a loud yell, just something to let the seeker know they were getting close. There were no off-limit areas in the game. We could hide anywhere, inside the house or outside, and even go into the nearby woods. We had 1 favorite area in the house and 3 favorite areas outside the house. They were our battlegrounds because they had various hiding spots that were perfect for our game. Thursday came around and we had finished dinner, so it was time to play. We always looked forward to playing our hide-and-seek game. I insisted on being the seeker first. I checked all the usual spots, starting from inside and then making my way outside. I didn't find him, so I headed out into the woods. We occasionally hid out here too, but not too often and not too deep in the woods. Upon walking through the woods, I hadn't found him yet, but came closer and closer to this abandoned cabin, which we knew was there. We had never been this far from his grandparents while playing hide-and-seek, so no one has ever hidden near the cabin. As I approached the cabin, I yelled out that he should make a sound if he was near. I stood completely still and looked at the cabin while waiting for a noise, but I heard nothing. I tilted my head. As I made the movement, I saw a silhouette move out of the dusty window frame. I realized my friend was hiding in there, so I figured I would check it out. I called out to him, but there was still no response. Just a deadly silence. Irritated and convinced that he was cheating, I pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. I found my way to some stairs leading up. It was hard to see anything since it had gotten dark and the only light I had was the moon shining through the windows. I went upstairs and went into the room that I had seen my friend through the window from outside. But he wasn't there. I heard a creak from the hallway and called out my friend's name and said he had to make a sound if he was there. I once again stood completely still and waited for a sound. I heard a short whistle sound. I thought to myself that I finally got him. Just as I was about to follow the sound, I heard another sound. It came from outside of the window. I turned my head with a fast motion and looked towards the window. I approached it and looked outside. I then saw my friend just a few feet away from the cabin, standing behind some trees. A surge of shockwaves ran through my body. I had no idea who was inside the cabin with me, and I had no idea how to get out of there. I just stood there listening for any footsteps coming my way, while thinking of a way to get out. It didn't look like it was a far jump to the ground from here, so I opened the window as quietly as I could. My friend heard that and started yelling at me. I tried to shush him, but he couldn't see me properly, so he kept yelling. While I was making my way out of the window, I heard footsteps quickly coming up the stairs. As I was about to jump, I saw a person enter the door frame. I jumped out and landed on my feet. I ran towards my friend and yelled that he should run because there was someone in there. He was confused and thought I joked, but as I kept running, he followed along. We ran back to his grandparents, panting and out of breath. We didn't say a word to them about it and went into my friend's room. He asked me what happened and I told him everything. We never went back, and our hide-and-seek games took on a much lighter tone after that night. This is a pretty bizarre and unsettling experience my mom and I had last year on Christmas Eve. We were on our way to join the rest of the family at a cabin, about an hour's drive away from our home. So my mom had some last-minute work stuff to wrap up, which delayed our departure. I thought, why not wait for her so we could have some company on the road? After all, it's just an hour's drive, not too far, but definitely better with some company. As we finally hit the road, we realized the gas tank was pretty low. I mean, we didn't want to get stuck in the middle of nowhere on Christmas Eve, so we decided to stop at this small gas station. It was pretty late, and being the day before Christmas, there weren't many folks around. In fact, we were the only ones there. After filling up the tank, just as we were about to leave, this dude suddenly appears out of nowhere and starts knocking on our window. My mom and I got scared as fuck. I mean, we didn't see anyone hanging around when we were pumping gas, and this guy just pops up out of the blue. He starts giving us this story about how his car broke down up the road a bit, and he needs a ride to the nearest town. Seemed innocent enough, except for the fact that we couldn't see any footprints in the fresh snow from the direction he claimed to have come from. I mean, it was snowing like crazy, but not so much that his footprints have already been erased. So if he had just walked there, we should have seen his tracks. He speaks of the holiday spirit, of the warmth of family, and the joy of sharing laughter and presents on Christmas morning. He appeals to our empathy, describing the bitter cold outside and the uncertain fate that awaits him if he's left to fend for himself in the blizzard. His story is a web of emotion. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't adding up. Plus, the whole line seemed way too rehearsed. Call me paranoid, but I wasn't about to let this sketchy situation ruin our Christmas plans. Luckily for us, I was the one driving, not my mom. She's a way to caring person, and this kind of shit is the thing that she would without a doubt fall for. The man started to get frustrated and tried to open the passenger door where my mom was sitting. Without even rolling the window up, I hit the gas and we peeled out of that gas station. As a car started to move, we could hear a shrilling sound, thinking that the man just screamed at us. My mom was a bit mad at me, saying things like, "Think if that was you, wouldn't you want somebody to help you?" We kept driving, and sure enough, no car was pulled to the side as he said his car was, which made my mom second-guess her judgment of the man. We didn't stop until we reached the cabin where the rest of the family was waiting. As my mom stepped out, she noticed that the car in her side, where the man was standing, had a scratch all the way along the car, which means that the shrilling sound we heard as we took off was probably because of the man holding something sharp in his hands, just waiting for us to open the door. A long time ago, I was just chilling in my room, headphones on, completely engrossed in some video game, when suddenly this distant wail of sirens cuts through the air. This happens quite often, nothing new really. Those sirens are coming from this abandoned building just 1 block away from my place. It was one of those abandoned buildings that had a rumor of being haunted. That's the reason why sirens are often heard from this place, because people like to explore the mysterious, you know. A lot of screams can often be heard at night as well, probably because the people that go there get scared to death. So when people go in there, police are often patrolling around this area. Exactly why, I don't know. Now, I am not one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, so I never did pay close attention to the screams that echoed from that place. I just thought it was a bunch of jokers fooling around. But this afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I thought, why not see what all the fuss is about? I mean, I know it's just an old building, but how come people keep screaming from that place, and why do the police patrol around that building? So, I called some of my friends and proposed the idea that we should try and explore it, and we decided to venture into the unknown. Armed with a bunch of flashlights and a daredevil attitude, we walked towards the building. When we got there, it did look creepy. I have walked past this building many times but haven't thought anything of it. Probably because today was different, and we were now standing in front of it, about to go in. We stepped into that ominous building, its creaky doors protesting our intrusion. It's weird how my whole stance changed from standing upright to slightly bending my knees and taking steps carefully. Our flashlight made shadows flickering on the walls, and this eerie ambiance that made my heart race. As we crept deeper, the sound started to intensify. We could hear water dripping from the ceiling, echoing through the empty rooms. I swear, each drop sounded like a distant whisper, and I couldn't shake off this feeling that we were being watched. And then there were these weird clinks and rattles like chains swaying in the breeze. We kept our cool, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. We heard distant noises too, other noises than the chain swaying and water dripping. Little did we know we weren't the only brave souls exploring its creepy corridors that day. The door was forcefully opened and all of us screamed louder than you could ever imagine. It was 2 other guys also exploring the building. We needed to catch our breath, so they kept going and we stayed behind for a while. And just when we thought we were the kings of bravery, ready to continue, one of my friends said that he wanted to go home, so we all decided to just go back home again. As we got back out, the police stood outside. Turns out, our little scream fest had been loud enough to get us a visit from the boys in blue. We got slapped with a noise complaint. We decided not to tell them about the 2 other guys in the building, hoping they wouldn't get a ticket as well, even though they scared us. As we stood there, shaking in our boots, an officer handed us a ticket, a stern look in his eyes. I couldn't help but chuckle, a mix of relief and embarrassment bubbling up inside me. We left the building that day, laughter and a few chills in tow, but we knew we'd never forget that heart-pounding adventure. My dad is working as a maintenance guy at the metro station. Now and then he works night shifts. My dad always had adventure stories to tell me when I was younger, but when I got older he told me this story that was bizarre and creepy. So his work contains of maintaining all sorts of errors that might occur, whether that is on the tracks or in the office. He was doing his usual rounds in the underground metro station. The place was deserted, and the silence of the tunnels was occasionally broken by the distant rumble of approaching trains. My old man always had some incredible stories to share after his shifts, but this one was on a whole other level. In his office at the station were CCTV cameras all over the place, and he had a direct view of what was happening on those screens from his maintenance room. That night, he was just about to call it a quiet shift when something caught his eye on the monitor. This guy comes running down the stairs leading into the station. The guy looked absolutely terrified, like he was fleeing from something. He scanned the area, eyes darting around frantically, as if he was searching for a place to hide or someone to help him. At first, my dad just thought it was another one of those crazy people on crack. They are everywhere to find in a metro station. But wait, it gets worse. Not even 20 seconds later, the sound of not only one but multiple people heading down the very same stairs this other guy came from. The first thing my dad notices is the noise. A group of 4 people descending the stairs side by side. I kid you not, they were wearing those creepy plague masks. His blood ran cold as they spread out on the platform, scanning the area with an unhurried precision. Behind every corner, every trash can, every sign. They even attempted to open every door. Everything on the floor was thoroughly scanned. My dad just stood there and looked at the CCTV, confused at what was going on, but at the same time terrified, especially because the door into the office was also checked. The masked men get back in the same position that they came down the first stairs with and continue down the next stairs, which lead down to the metro. Now here's where it takes a truly horrifying turn. My dad, glued to the CCTV feed, suddenly hears a prolonged, desperate scream. He could tell it was the first guy. The scream echoed through the empty station. Without a second's hesitation, those 4 masked figures ran towards the terrified man. They started beating him mercilessly, landing blow after blow while the poor guy lay defenseless on the platform. The man lay unconscious, a bloody, broken mess, and the 4 men showed no signs of stopping before their job was done. The next thing he saw was those 4 masked men pushed the defenseless guy down onto the tracks and left him there, motionless and vulnerable. My dad had called the police as soon as he saw the men began to beat up this guy. He was on the phone with the police before he even fully comprehended what he'd witnessed. As soon as those 4 twisted individuals left the scene, my dad didn't hesitate. He rushed down to the tracks to pull the unconscious man from the brink of death. It felt like an eternity, but he finally managed to pull the man to safety just before the police entered the station. He had never seen such brutality, such heartless violence, and that's also the reason he didn't tell me before I got older. I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't the first time they have done this. With that sort of precision they had, the accuracy, the coordination, it was sick. If it was all fun and games for them, or if they are some sort of debt collectors, I don't know. I used to work in a small dry cleaning business in my gap year. The incident I had when I worked there has surely left a scar on me. One day at work, I was alone with the owner, just finishing the last few chores before closing. The sky was overcast, and the rain tapped rhythmically on the windows. And I always biked to work, so I told her that I wasn't in a hurry of getting home. So we just waited for the rain to end, and I stayed a bit longer and helped with some extra tasks. The phone rang just 2 minutes before closing time. A voice on the other end sounded desperate, a shaky woman's voice. The woman explained that she needed a favor. Her voice was quivering as she said her daughter had just experienced her first period and, well, the blood had soaked into their bed sheets. They had also tried to use towels to clean the sheets. She couldn't afford to buy new ones, and she'd tried everything to clean it herself. Now, I'm no stranger to handling tough stains, but the sincerity in her voice struck a chord. She said they were in a tight spot financially. I put her on speaker so she could talk with the owner. She assured her that we could take care of it and she could drop it off now if she wanted to. She sounded immensely relieved and said she'd be over soon. The owner asked if I could handle it myself, and I figured it wouldn't be a problem, so she left. The The minutes ticked by, and I turned on the radio to fill the silence and began folding some clothes left behind by customers. As time passed, I started to wonder if the woman had changed her mind or if she was just running late. But then, there was a soft, hesitant knock at the door. I got up and opened it to find a tired-looking woman, her face partially hidden beneath a soaked hoodie. The sheets she handed me were a mess, soaked in dark stains. I couldn't figure out if the expression on her face was embarrassment or panic. I told her not to worry, that I'd seen worse stains in my time, which was true. I assured her I'd do my best to get them clean and offered her a hot cup of coffee to warm her up. She said she didn't have time and went straight out of the store again. It felt quite odd. I got to work on those sheets, scrubbing as hard as I could. The rain stopped and I decided to lock up and finish it the next day. The next day before I clocked in, the owner had already started the cleaning. I had expected to find them in the same condition as when the woman dropped them off. The owner told me that I could just deliver it as the last task of the day. Later that evening, the owner and I discussed the plan for delivering the sheets and towels back to the woman. We had agreed to drop them off at her house, which she had described as being a bit remote. I set off in the company car with the freshly cleaned sheets. I followed the directions she had given me the day before, since she didn't pick up the phone when I called her, so she had no idea I even came with them now. After 10 minutes of driving, I took a left on a dirt road that led further and further away from civilization. It was at least a 2-minute drive from the nearest neighbors. When I finally arrived at the only house at the destination she had described, I was met with a sight that I didn't feel comfortable with. The house she had described looked almost abandoned, its windows dark and shattered, and the paint peeling off in chunks. I parked my car and approached the front door. I knocked, but there was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. I could hear yelling inside. It sounded like a man and a woman yelling back and forth. I could only make out that the man was confused as to who was at their door. I yelled from outside that it was from the dry cleaner. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened slowly and only halfway, revealing a man. He looked just as messy as the woman who had dropped off the sheets. I told him that a woman had dropped off some sheets and towels the day before, and that she had described this place. The woman entered the door frame behind the man. She had a black eye that I hadn't noticed when she came to the store yesterday, so I had no idea if she got it in the meantime or if she already had it. The man looked at her and got angry with her because she had dropped off the sheets and towels at the dry cleaning. I felt uncomfortable just standing there and listening to the man insulting the woman. The man opened the door wide to receive the sheets. Revealing a better view inside. Right there behind them was way more sheets and clothes that had the same red color as the sheets we had just cleaned. There were also big black plastic bags next to them. I told them it was on the house and went back towards the car. The door slammed and the man started yelling again. Getting back inside the car was relieving. I was in shock and didn't really know what to think of the whole situation or what had happened. And I'm not sure I want to know. My friend had just turned 18 and we decided that we wanted to go clubbing the following week to celebrate. Days went by and it was Friday night. My friends and I decided to hit up one of those trendy clubs downtown. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and the city was packed with people. We were having a blast, dancing like there was no tomorrow. Minutes turned into hours and we got drunk and tired. Fast forward to the end of the night, the club was closing, and my friends and I were making our way exit. I had to take the metro to get home as I was heading straight to my brother and not home to my parents. This is where things take a turn for the worse. Already when we were dancing in the club, this guy kept dancing close against me and my friends. A guy who looked to be in his early 30s. We told him off a couple of times, but didn't think any further of it as he disappeared after the third or fourth time. I don't really remember. The girls were heading in the same direction as me, so they practically followed me to the metro. I went downstairs and waited patiently for my metro. About 2 minutes later, the same man that we had trouble with at the club entered the metro station. My body froze. I had no idea what to do. Thoughts struck through my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy was following me. The metro came and I prayed to God that it wasn't empty. I waited a bit before entering to watch if the man would enter before me, just to somewhat clarify if it was all just a coincidence. The man didn't approach it. I slowly went inside, and just before the door slammed shut, the man entered. I felt surrounded, even though the car was empty, except from us. He positioned himself at the far end of the metro car, so he had a clear view of me but pretended not to. I tried to ignore him, but every time I looked in his direction, he'd quickly avert his gaze. It was like a messed up game of cat and mouse. Of course, he knew what he was up to, but I was pretty sure I knew it too. And I'm pretty sure he knew that I knew. Like it was a sick and twisted game for this sick individual. At this point, I knew I had to do something. I stood up suddenly, pretending it was my stop. The man rose too, confirming my suspicions. My actual stop was still a few stations away, so I sat back down, nervously pretending I'd changed my mind. I watched as he did the same. My heart pounded like a drum and I felt trapped. I decided to make a call to my brother. I needed someone to know what was happening, just in case. He answered, and I whispered the whole situation into the phone, including the description of the man following me. My brother told me he was on his way to pick me up. That reassured me a bit, but I was still stuck in that metro car with this psycho stranger. The minutes dragged on as I pretended to be calm, desperately waiting for my brother to be with me. Finally, our metro pulled into my stop. I knew my brother was waiting there and I couldn't wait to get off that train. I stood up and so did the man, his eyes locked onto me like a predator closing in on its prey. But then the moment of truth came, as the metro doors slid open, revealing my brother's face. The man's eyes widened in shock and he turned on his heels without saying a word, disappearing into the station. I shudder to imagine what could have happened if I hadn't called my brother, or if he hadn't been there to pick me up. It's a sobering reminder that the world can be a scary place, even on a seemingly ordinary night out. So, please, everyone stay safe, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to reach out for help when you need it. I was 22 at the time and living in a very small one-bedroom house in the cheapest area of my city. After work on a Friday night, I hopped online to play a game with a bunch of my friends. It was the perfect and cozy winter night for staying up late with cold weather outside and no work or school the next day. Everything was closed due to heavy blizzard for 3 days. I had a blanket over me and played for probably 2 hours before a sudden sound had me put everything on pause for a minute. It was a thump sounding like it was upstairs. My initial concern was a possible breakage in the roof caused by the storm outside, so I went up to look. The only rooms upstairs were a single bedroom and a half bathroom, and neither of them had any signs of breakage anywhere. So I ran back down and got back online with my friends. I was on for a while, only getting off at 2 a.m. because everyone else went to bed. I shut everything off and sat on the couch with some snacks and tea for the weather, while I watched YouTube on my phone. I felt kind of relaxed and cozy for some time until something strange happened. 10 minutes in, I heard another thump from upstairs again, but it was so muffled that it almost sounded like it was on the roof or something. I went up to see, and when I was about to open the bedroom door in the corridor upstairs, I heard someone whispering inside, as if someone was talking and laughing. I opened the door quickly and everything went quiet. There was no one in the room. Then I felt as if picture frames on the walls were trembling like an earthquake, but I couldn't figure out the reason for it. I was sure it wasn't the storm either because it vibrated through the walls like something literally hitting the house. After 10 minutes of looking around, I was so determined to figure it out that I put on my jacket, muffler on my neck, and shoes to go out into the storm and see if there was something more noticeable from outside. While standing outside, I could still hear sinister thumps coming from inside the house. All of a sudden, I caught sight of a shadowy figure in the window at the top of the house. I could see its creepy smile, and it was looking right at me. I ran inside the house and went upstairs. The window was higher than the bedroom window, meaning it had to be an attic. I had no idea there was an attic in this house. This hidden window was the first clue I'd ever seen to indicate there was an attic. I went to search for the hatch that would open the attic door. It took a minute, but to my surprise, I found it inside my bedroom closet. It was small and perfectly smooth, with the ceiling basically blending in aside from the tiny gaps from where it opened. I stood up on a box and pulled it down, releasing a rusty ladder from the opening. Immediately, I was hit with a rotten smell, followed by another thump sound. I climbed up carefully and looked into this tiny space, basically a wide, dark tunnel. In the end, by the window, I saw a crooked figure ducked down on all fours and looking straight at me with a creepy smile on its face. Its eyes were glowing with the flashlight in my hand that reflected from his eyes. I almost fell off the ladder trying to jump down and run away. I heard him shuffling around as I got my phone and left the house, calling 911 in my driveway. The cops got there despite the storm and detained the man. He never said why he was there or what he wanted to do, but the police took him with them. While getting into the cop car, he was still looking at me with a creepy smile and furious look on his face. Everything about it was almost unbelievable. I moved out very soon after that, and in every house since I've always checked the attics. But the one thing that has stayed with me is the image of that man at the end of the attic on his hands and knees, staring at me with eyes resembling both fear and anger. My girlfriend and I had back in 2016 rented out a cozy cabin that was located in the woods. It was winter, and there were snow-covered trees as far as the eye could see. The perfect winter wonderland. We'd been planning this getaway for months, longing for some peace. We arrived pretty late, so we took our toilet bag and what else we needed, and went straight to bed. There wasn't much light, so we didn't get to see the cabin very well before the next day. The cabin was a rustic place, far from any signs of people. It was everything we'd dreamed of, with a fireplace, dimly lit interior, and no interruption from anyone but ourselves. When I went outside to the car the next day to gather the last things from the trunk, I noticed some tracks in the snow. It looked like footsteps, so I asked my wife if she was out during night or early this morning. She told me she hadn't been outside and asked me why. I lied and said that it just looked so beautiful outside and didn't mention the tracks. She can easily freak out, and it was probably nothing, so I went out to kind of cover the tracks before she noticed them. As I covered them, I saw they came from the edge of the woods nearby, which was really weird. I mean, it could easily be an animal of some sort, but the tracks looked too much like human footsteps. I'm no expert, but it did make me think twice. We went on with our second day, and it was perfect. We cooked a delicious meal, clinked our wine glasses, and watched the snow fall through the cabin's frosty windows. As we lay in bed, wrapped up in each other's arms, I couldn't help but think how lucky we were to enjoy such a good time together. But that's when things started to get weird. My girlfriend woke me up around 11 p.m. and said something about tapping sounds. She mumbled something about the wind, but I was so tired. I just pulled her close to me and we went back to sleep. I woke up around 2 a.m. and it was freezing. I cuddled up against my girlfriend to get warm again, but she was just as cold. I then noticed that I could hear the wind surprisingly good. I got up and entered the living room, but as I got further in, a feeling so unbearable struck through me. I had stepped on some glass. I had to wake up my girlfriend so she could help me getting the glass out of my foot. We tried to turn on the few light sources we had, but none of them worked. The electricity was out. She had to pull out the glass using the light of a candle as the only light source. It was hectic, but warm, which felt great. She then asked me where that windy sound came from and why there was glass on the floor. And then I remembered that's what I was up for, to check it out. It appeared that the window was smashed in, and that was probably what had woken up my girlfriend earlier that night. As we went closer to the window, true horror struck through my girlfriend and me. Just as yesterday, I saw footprints leading from the edge of the woods right up to our cabin. I no longer thought this could be an animal. I told her about the footsteps I saw yesterday. We both turned out the candle so nobody could look inside and see us. And then we went back to the bedroom to scout outside from the window. In the distance, we saw a man who was covered in clothes as if he was about to climb Mount Everest. And he just stood there, looking towards the cabin. We decided to lock all the doors and windows. We were too afraid to go back to sleep, and we were talking back and forth about what the heck was going on. I think we sat there for 2 hours just looking at the person outside. We concluded it was best to just get away from there. So my girlfriend packed our bags in a hurry while I kept looking out. When all the bags were packed, we got dressed up and ran out the door over to the car and drove off. While all this was happening, the man just stood completely still. But as we drove away and I looked into the rear mirror, the man walked towards the cabin. The day after we got home, we tried calling the person who rented out the cabin, but we could get in contact. 1 week later, we received an email explaining that we need to pay for the window and leaving the cabin without cleaning it. On top of that, we got a payment because we just left the cabin unlocked and didn't leave the key at the same spot the person had left it for us. We wrote back what had happened to us, and that there was no chance that we would pay for that. We never received another mail from them. It was a regular evening in my old creaky house, and I had just wrapped up a long day. The clock had just struck 9 p.m., and I decided it was time for a relaxing shower before I hit the hay. Now, I'm a gal who lives alone, and I'm not ashamed to admit that sometimes my imagination runs wild, especially in an old house like mine. I turned on the water, letting the steam envelop the bathroom, and hopped into the shower. At first, everything was serene. The water was warm, and I could hear the gentle patter against the tiles. But, as I started to lather up, I began to notice something odd. Faint sounds, like the creak of a floorboard, the soft groan of a door. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly shut off the water to listen. Sure enough, there it was again. A faint, unmistakable creak from the direction of the kitchen downstairs. Now, this ain't my first rodeo with the weird noises in my house, so I brushed it off as the usual old house antics. But you know that feeling when your gut tells you something's not quite right? Well, mine was screaming at me to investigate. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around myself, and tiptoed out of the bathroom. Chilly, and the darkness seemed thicker than usual. I peered down the hallway toward the staircase that led to the first floor. Another creak, followed by a distant thud. The sound seemed to echo through the house, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Taking a deep breath, I descended the creaky stairs, each step accompanied by the unnerving symphony of old wood. The kitchen was bathed in a dim glow from a bulb hanging above. My heart raced as I cautiously moved forward, my wet footprints leaving a trail on the linoleum. As I reached the kitchen entrance, the unsettling feeling intensified. I was on edge, every sense heightened. My ears strained for any sound, my eyes darted around the room, and even the taste of fear seemed to linger on my tongue. And then it happened. A shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, a mere glimpse, a presence where there shouldn't have been one. My breath caught and I turned in a panic, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was nothing there, nothing but an empty kitchen, shrouded in silence. For a moment I thought maybe my imagination had truly run wild this time. Maybe I was exhausted beyond belief. But just as that comforting thought crossed my mind, another sound shattered it. The front door slamming shut. I raced to the window overlooking the driveway and froze. There, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was a figure walking away from my house, down the driveway, disappearing into the night. My heart pounded against my ribs as I tried to make out any details, but it was too dark to see much. It took me a moment to collect myself, but once I did, I dialed the police faster than I ever thought possible. When they arrived, they combed the area, but there was no trace of anyone. No signs of a break-in, no footprints leading to my door. Just the unsettling feeling that someone had been there in my home, watching, listening. Now, I'm not one to easily buy into spooky tales, and I've never been one to entertain notions of ghosts or otherworldly beings. But that night, the terror I felt was all too real. Someone had been in my house watching me, waiting for the right moment. To this day, I shudder at the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and investigated those noises. I realized that night that danger can often be the closest when we least expect it. It's easy to dismiss our instincts, to convince ourselves that we're overreacting or being paranoid. But as I replayed those moments in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the fear that had driven me to investigate. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was intuition, but whatever it was, it had saved me from potentially walking into a nightmare. I mean, if I had not noticed. Would he wait around till I went to bed and fell asleep? Was he just stealing? Like, what was this person really up to? In the days that followed, I took every precaution imaginable. New locks, security systems, and even a trusty baseball bat by my bedside became my new normal. But beyond the physical measures, something else had changed within me. That night had shattered the illusion of safety I had built around myself, reminding me that darkness can exist in the most ordinary places. So let me just start by saying I never thought I'd be the type to share one of those creepy things happened to me stories. But here I am. I'm 17 and was stuck in a house that's kinda in the middle of nowhere while my parents and siblings are off on some family trip. My plan for the evening was simple: have the house to myself, order some takeout, and then dive into my beloved video games until the wee hours of the morning. Seemed like a solid way to spend my time, especially considering the quiet surroundings and the fact that I wouldn't be disturbed. Things were going smoothly as I stuffed my face with pizza, and I had just started playing when I heard this weird noise. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it sounded like footsteps, like someone walking around outside. I paused the game, straining my ears to listen, but the noise stopped. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and continued gaming. Then, a while later, it started again. This time it was clearer. Footsteps, no doubt about it. But here's the thing. My parents weren't due back until next week. That meant either they'd come back early, which was unlikely, or something else was going on. I pulled up the blinds, peering out into the dark night. Yeah, I know it sounds like a horror movie cliche, but you can't blame me for wanting to make sure everything was fine. There, in the distance, I saw a figure. A person, standing in the yard. My heart started racing, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up my spine. I couldn't make out much about the person. It was too dark and they were a fair distance away, but I could tell they were just staring in the direction of the house. The worst part was, they weren't moving, just standing there. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking a bit as I dialed my parents, but they didn't pick up. I stared back at the figure for a few more moments before slowly pulling the blinds down. My mind was racing, thoughts of all those horror movies I'd watched rushing through my head. I tried to convince myself that it was probably just some lost traveler or a neighbor, but deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I spent the rest of the evening on edge, every little creak and rustle making me jump. I even thought I heard faint tapping on the windows a couple of times, but when I'd look, there'd be nothing there. Eventually, sheer exhaustion caught up with me, and I managed to convince myself that I was just letting my imagination run wild. I crawled into bed, my heart still racing, but I figured if I could just close my eyes and focus on getting some sleep. I fell asleep pretty fast, but in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. I lay there in the dark for a moment, trying to shake off that groggy feeling and figure out what had woken me up. That's when I heard it again. Those sounds, definitely not just the wind, were echoing through the house, like footsteps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I listened, every nerve in my body screaming that something was very wrong. I was no longer trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. There was no denying it. There were people inside the house. My heart pounded in my chest and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. I knew I had to act. I had to figure out what was going on. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my heart practically pounding out of my chest. I tiptoed to my bedroom door, straining my ears to listen for any signs of movement. It was like a horror movie come to life, except this was my life, and I was the guy in it. Gritting my teeth, I edged the door open just a crack, trying to get a sense of where those sounds were coming from. As I stepped out into the hallway, I felt the cold floor beneath my feet. Goosebumps raced up my arms and the dread just kept building with every step I took. I felt like I was in a game, my senses heightened as I tried to stay as silent as possible. I peeked into the living room, then the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The back door was slightly ajar. Panic surged through me. I knew for sure now that someone was in the house, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. My mind raced and I quickly shut the back door, my hands trembling. But then I noticed something. Mud. Like fresh mud, leading from the back door towards the basement. It was as if someone had tracked it in. My heart sank. Every horror movie cliche filled my thoughts, but I couldn't just stand there frozen. I knew I had to act, had to figure out what was going on. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my ears, and started following the trail of mud. But let me tell you, no way in hell was I going down into that basement. No way. I hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, my heart racing. The idea of going down there where I couldn't see anything was just out of the question. So I decided to backtrack. to quietly make my way back to my room and call the police. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I held the device to my ear. As I whispered into the phone explaining the situation, I made my way back to my room. I locked the door behind me, my heart still pounding like a jackhammer. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, waiting for the cops to arrive, all while desperately hoping that whoever was in my house wouldn't figure out where I was hiding. The dispatcher told me to stay put and wait for the police to arrive. So there I was, alone in my room, trembling and terrified, listening to every creak and rustle, wondering if whoever was in the house knew I was onto them. I could now hear the approaching sirens wailing nearby. I think the intruders could too. Their rumbling in the basement stopped for a while, and I could hear they ran up the stairs from the basement. To my luck, the police was already in the house and greeted the intruders just as they came out of the basement. I felt like a superhero, a terrified superhero. We finally got my parents on the phone, and they were shocked to hear about it all. They said they would come home as soon as possible. As I sit here in my room today writing this, I can't help but replay those chilling moments in my head. And let me tell you, it's going to be a long while before I feel safe in this house again, if ever.